In the beginning, there was nothing but chaos. An endless, boundless void, where nothing existed except for the raw potential of creation. The very fabric of the universe, hanging in delicate balance, waiting to be shaped. And then, from the depths of this chaos, life began to stir. From the void emerged the first beings, Gaia, the earth, and Uranus, the sky. Together, they would give birth to the world, a world that would be shaped by gods and monsters, heroes and villains. But with creation came conflict. Uranus, fearful of his own children's strength, cast them down into the abyss of Tartarus, trapping them in eternal darkness. But there was one who would rise against him. One who would defy the very heavens themselves. Cronus, the youngest of the Titans, saw his father's cruelty and knew that to rule the world, he would have to overthrow the very power that created him. And so, with a twisted sense of justice and an insatiable thirst for power, Cronus took action. He would rise not just against his father, but against the gods themselves. With one strike, Cronus severed the bond between heaven and earth. He castrated Uranus, his own father, casting him from the skies, and with that, the world trembled. The blood of Uranus spilled onto the earth and sea, and from it, new beings emerged. New gods. But the war for control had only just begun. Cronus, now the ruler of the universe, feared nothing more than a prophecy. A prophecy that one of his own children would rise against him and overthrow his rule, just as he had done to Uranus. And so, driven by terror and the desire to hold onto his power, Cronus made a terrible choice. He swallowed his children whole, one by one, to prevent the prophecy from coming true. His own flesh and blood, consumed in an instant, destined never to see the light of day. But there was one who would escape. One who would defy the darkness and rise to challenge the king of the gods himself. Zeus, the youngest of Cronus' children, was hidden away by his mother, Rhea. He would grow in secret, unknown to his father, while the world quivered in fear of Cronus' reign. But as the years passed, the prophecy loomed ever closer, and the tension between father and son grew unbearable. Would Zeus be able to defy the very fate his father had tried to destroy? Would he challenge the tyrant who had swallowed his siblings, or would the prophecy remain forever unfulfilled? The battle for the throne of the gods was on the horizon, and the fate of the universe would depend on a single child, hidden, yet destined to change everything. The question is, would he be able to defeat the king of the gods and free his brothers and sisters, or would the blood of the gods forever stain the earth? Zeus grew in secret, hidden from his father's prying eyes. Raised by the wise and powerful nymphs of Crete, he was nurtured in the shadows, far from the tyrannical reach of Cronus. But the weight of destiny loomed over him, and as the years passed, the prophecy that had been sealed in blood began to echo in the heavens. One day, as Zeus reached the age of maturity, a plan began to take shape. His mother, Rhea, could no longer bear the pain of seeing her children devoured by Cronus. She sent word to her son, hidden deep within the caves of Crete. The time had come to confront the nightmare that had consumed their family. Zeus, burning with righteous anger, knew that his path would not be an easy one. To challenge Cronus meant defying not only the king of the gods, but the very foundation of power itself. But there was no turning back. He would either rise as the savior of his family or be swallowed by the darkness of his father's rule. With the help of the mighty Titaness Métis, Zeus devised a clever scheme. He would trick Cronus into regurgitating his swallowed siblings. Disguised as a cupbearer, he would serve his father a potion that would compel him to expel the gods he had devoured. The moment of reckoning arrived. Zeus, disguised as a humble servant, stood before Cronus in his vast palace. His heart raced, his every breath a countdown to the unfolding of fate itself. With trembling hands, Zeus presented the cup, a simple vessel containing the most powerful concoction the world had ever seen. The gods above watched in silence, holding their breath. Cronus, unsuspecting, took the cup and drank deeply. The potion burned through him, a fire that surged through his veins, and in an agonizing instant, Cronus got twisted in pain. One by one, the gods began to emerge. First, Hestia, then Hera, Demeter, Poseidon, and finally, the mighty god of war, Ares. Each reborn, each filled with a new sense of power and purpose. But as the gods returned, so too did the battle. The Titans would not give up their power so easily. Cronus, furious and enraged, realized too late that his grip on the throne had slipped. He called upon his loyal Titans, the mighty forces that had once ruled the world. The war that followed would shake the heavens themselves. Yet, as the battle raged on, Zeus found strength he had never known. With his siblings by his side, he was no longer the hidden child of prophecy. He was a leader, a force of nature in his own right. Together, they faced the might of the Titans, and together, they would shake the very foundations of Olympus. But the fight would not be over easily. The Titans fought with every ounce of their power, unleashing terror and destruction upon the gods. In the heart of this chaotic struggle, Zeus discovered something that would change the course of the war forever. The Cyclopes, 3 giants imprisoned in Tartarus, held the key to victory. The Cyclopes, masters of the forge, were freed by Zeus' hand. In gratitude, they crafted weapons of unimaginable power: Zeus' thunderbolt, Poseidon's trident, and Hades' helm of darkness. With these divine weapons, the gods stood a chance against their monstrous foes. But even armed with these mighty gifts, the gods would face their greatest challenge yet. For in the depths of Tartarus, the Titans gathered their strength, preparing for a final assault, one that would decide the fate of the world. The stage was set. The battle for the throne was no longer just a clash of gods and Titans. It was a war that would determine the very fate of the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. And at the center of it all stood Zeus, determined, fearless, and ready to claim his destiny. Would the gods triumph, or would the Titans reclaim their power? The battle for Olympus had begun, and it would take more than strength to win. The battle for Olympus had reached its peak, and the heavens themselves seemed to tremble with each clash. The gods, now armed with their divine weapons, stood tall and defiant against the Titans. Zeus wielded his thunderbolt like a force of nature, Poseidon's trident cracked the earth itself, and Hades' helm of darkness cloaked them all in a veil of mystery. At the heart of this tumultuous war, the gods fought with unmatched ferocity. But it was not just physical strength that would win this battle. It was strategy, cunning, and the power of alliances. Zeus, now the leader of the Olympians, knew that to defeat Cronus and the Titans once and for all, they would need more than raw might. They would need the full support of the divine forces that lay beyond the heavens and earth. One such force was the Titans' own enemies, the Gigantes, the monstrous children of Gaia. These creatures, half human, half beast, had once been allies of the Titans. But the Gigantes had grown restless, and now they too sought to claim dominion over the world. Zeus knew that if he could convince them to join the Olympians, it would tip the balance in their favor. In the shadow of the battlefield, Zeus descended into the depths of Tartarus, where the Gigantes had been imprisoned by the Titans. There he faced a creature unlike any other, Typhon, the most terrifying monster ever to have existed. Typhon was a beast of chaos, with serpentine legs that reached into the very bowels of the earth, and 100 dragon heads that breathed fire and venom. Typhon's roar shook the heavens, and his very presence threatened to engulf all of Olympus. But Zeus, determined to end the war once and for all, called upon the gods' greatest weapon, unity. With a single, mighty thunderbolt, he struck Typhon down. The beast screamed in agony as he fell, the ground quaking beneath him. Zeus had won the Gigantes' allegiance. But the true test lay ahead. The final confrontation with Cronus was now inevitable, and the fate of the entire world rested on a single moment, one that would decide the future of the gods and their dominion over all realms. With the Titans in retreat and the Gigantes now aligned with the Olympians, Zeus and his allies stormed the heart of the Titans' stronghold, Mount Othrys. The earth shook beneath their feet as they approached the dark citadel where Cronus awaited, preparing for the final confrontation. Cronus, for all his power and ruthlessness, had begun to show signs of desperation. He could feel the shifting tides of fate, and he knew that the end was near. But he was not willing to go down without a fight. With his most loyal Titans by his side, he summoned his dark magic, ready to unleash his full wrath upon the Olympians. As the battle between father and son unfolded, the very heavens seemed to shudder. Zeus, with his thunderbolt raised high, faced Cronus. His father, the one who had tried to destroy him and his siblings, the one who had cast so many into the abyss. This was not just a battle for the throne of the gods. It was a battle for freedom, for justice, and for the future of all creation. The air crackled with divine energy as Zeus and Cronus collided. The clash of their power sent shockwaves through the earth, causing mountains to crumble and seas to rise. Zeus' thunderbolts struck the sky, and Cronus retaliated with waves of crushing force. Each strike was more than a mere attack. It was the final reckoning, a moment that would determine who would rule the cosmos. Time seemed to slow as father and son fought. Zeus' resolve was unyielding, his power unmatched. But Cronus, the once mighty king of the gods, fought with all the desperation of a tyrant who knew his reign was ending. And just as it seemed like the battle might reach a deadly stalemate, Zeus unleashed a final, devastating strike. With a mighty roar, Zeus hurled his thunderbolt directly at Cronus, piercing his heart. The sky tore apart as the bolt of divine power exploded upon impact. Cronus, once the ruler of the heavens, fell to his knees, his power shattered, and his reign of terror finally ended. But even as Cronus fell, his death was not without consequence. The very fabric of the universe trembled as the forces of chaos and order collided in one final, cataclysmic clash. The world itself began to shift, and the Olympians, now victorious, knew that their work was far from over. The Titans may have been defeated, but the world was far from settled. New threats would rise, and the gods would have to face challenges they could never have anticipated. Zeus, now standing atop the shattered remnants of Cronus, looked out over the horizon. The war was won, but the true reign of the Olympian gods was only just beginning. What came next would shape the future of the gods, and the fate of all humanity. The fall of Cronus marked the beginning of a new era, one where the gods of Olympus would reign supreme over the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. But the world they inherited was far from peaceful, and the gods would soon discover that the victory over the Titans was only the first step in a much larger struggle for control. As Zeus and his siblings ascended to their thrones on Mount Olympus, the very foundations of the cosmos began to tremble with new forces born of ambition, rivalry, and the ever-looming chaos that threatened to tear everything apart. The gods of Olympus were now in charge, but they soon found themselves at odds with each other, vying for supremacy and the fate of the world. Zeus, now the undisputed ruler of the gods, found himself at the center of a new conflict, the one between his own kin. Poseidon, his brother, longed to claim the sea as his own domain, while Hades, another brother, ruled over the underworld with a power that was just as absolute as Zeus' control over the skies. The realm of the earth itself was divided, with each god laying claim to their own sphere of influence. The tensions between the gods grew unbearable, and a new kind of war loomed over Olympus. Not the Titans, not the Gigantes, but the very gods themselves were on the brink of civil war. Zeus, ever the strategist, knew that if Olympus was to endure, he would need to quell this rising conflict before it consumed the world in chaos. In the midst of this rising tension, a new, unexpected player entered the divine drama. The mortals, humanity, whose fate was now inextricably tied to the gods, began to show signs of their own potential. Where once they had been pawns in the gods' eternal game, now they were emerging as something far more dangerous, a force to be reckoned with. The gods watched in both awe and fear as humans began to build empires, develop their own strategies, and defy the will of the gods. Legends of mortal heroes began to spread, heroes who fought not only with strength but with intelligence, cunning, and bravery. These mortals, born of humble origins, were challenging the very gods who had shaped their world. One such hero would rise to become one of the most infamous in all of Greek mythology, Heracles. Born of Zeus himself, but cast into a mortal life, Heracles would grow to become a symbol of both strength and resilience, battling monsters that threatened the gods and humans alike. But his journey was not without sacrifice. Heracles, unlike any other mortal, had been granted gifts by the gods themselves, yet his path was fraught with trials that tested not just his physical power, but his spirit. The 12 labors, a series of near-impossible feats, would forge him into a legend. But his greatest challenge was yet to come, the challenge of facing the very forces of destiny. Heracles' rise, however, was not the only story unfolding in this new age. Among the mortals, there were others who sought to challenge the gods, and in their hubris, they threatened to unravel the divine order that Zeus and the Olympians had worked so hard to establish. One such figure was the mighty king, King Minos of Crete. Minos, ruler of the island of Crete, was a king of unmatched ambition. Not only did he defy the gods by claiming the favor of Poseidon, demanding the gift of a magnificent bull as a sign of divine approval, but he also went as far as to imprison the Minotaur, a beast of horrifying power, within a labyrinth that was said to be the most impenetrable structure ever built. Minos' actions would lead to divine retribution. Poseidon, angered by the king's insolence, would curse Minos with a terrible fate. His wife, Pasiphae, would fall prey to a monstrous desire, and the curse would result in the birth of the Minotaur, a creature of terror that would torment Crete for generations. The labyrinth itself became a symbol of the gods' wrath and the inevitable consequences of defying their will. Zeus, seeing the consequences of mortals challenging divine authority, began to question the role the gods should play in the mortal realm. Should they protect the humans, guide them, or let them chart their own destinies, no matter the cost? The answer was far from clear. And so, the gods of Olympus continued their divine struggle. While Zeus and his brothers ruled their realms, the challenges they faced from their own kind and from the mortal world would test their unity and strength. The greatest test, however, would come not from any external enemy, but from the very core of Olympus itself. For as the gods would soon learn, the balance between power and morality is fragile, and those who wield the power to shape the world must contend with the consequences of their choices. The gods, in all their glory and might, were not invincible. They were not immune to the forces of fate. Would Zeus and his siblings be able to maintain control over Olympus, or would the very foundation they built begin to crumble beneath the weight of their ambition and hubris? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: the gods had a long, tumultuous road ahead of them, and the mortal world, too, would play a much larger role than they could have ever imagined. As the gods of Olympus solidified their rule, a sense of unease began to spread across the heavens. The gods had emerged victorious in their war against the Titans, but they were now faced with a new, more complex challenge: how to maintain their power and influence over a world that was rapidly changing. While Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades ruled their respective domains, sky, sea, and underworld, their grip on the mortal realm was not as secure as they would have liked. The mortals, once subjugated to the whims of the gods, were beginning to grow restless. The actions of the great heroes like Heracles had sparked something within humanity, a desire to rise above their fate, to challenge the gods themselves. In the heart of Olympus, Zeus convened a council with his brothers and the other gods. They knew they had to establish order, but how could they govern a world where mortals were beginning to shape their own destinies? Where once they had ruled without question, now the gods were forced to reckon with the consequences of their own actions. Among the gods, one figure rose to challenge the very foundations of their reign: Apollo, the god of the sun and prophecy. Apollo, ever the master of knowledge, believed that the gods had grown complacent in their power. The mortals had become more than just puppets in the divine play; they were becoming active participants in the cosmic drama. Apollo warned that if the gods didn't adjust to this new reality, they risked losing their influence forever. But Zeus, ever the embodiment of power and justice, refused to yield. He believed that the gods were meant to rule over the world, to guide and shape the destinies of all creatures. His vision for the gods was one of absolute authority, where the Olympians stood above all, and mortals were meant to worship and serve them. His stubbornness, however, would soon lead to the rise of a new force, one that would challenge the gods on an entirely different level. Enter Prometheus, the Titan who had sided with the Olympians in the war against his own kin. Once a trusted ally, Prometheus had grown disillusioned with the gods' treatment of mankind. He saw the humans as more than mere playthings in the gods' game. He believed they deserved knowledge, power, and a chance at their own future. And so, in an act of defiance, Prometheus did the unthinkable. He stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. Prometheus' gift of fire was not just a tool for survival, it was a symbol of human potential. It represented knowledge, creativity, and the power to shape their own fate. With fire, humans could build, create, and transform the world. But to the gods, it was a grievous act of rebellion, a challenge to their authority. Zeus, furious at the audacity of Prometheus, demanded immediate retribution. The gods were divided. Some saw the act as a bold defiance of their rule, while others, like Athena and Hephaestus, understood the importance of Prometheus' gift. But Zeus, unwilling to tolerate such disobedience, ordered that Prometheus be punished in the harshest way imaginable. Prometheus was bound to a rock, his body chained, and every day an eagle would tear at his flesh, feasting on his liver. But even in his torment, Prometheus never regretted his decision. He had given humanity the gift of fire, and with it, the spark of life and ambition that would one day lead to the downfall of the gods themselves. But Prometheus' punishment was just the beginning. The gods' anger over his betrayal sparked a chain of events that would forever change the relationship between mortals and immortals. As humans grew more powerful, they began to demand more from the gods: more power, more freedom, and more control over their own fate. The balance of the cosmos was shifting, and the gods were beginning to realize that they could no longer control everything. Then, a new hero emerged from the mortal world, a man named Theseus. Theseus, a prince of Athens, would come to embody the spirit of defiance that had begun to spread across the mortal realm. He, too, would challenge the gods in ways that no mortal had before. Theseus' most famous feat was the slaying of the Minotaur, the beast born from the cursed union between Minos' wife and a bull sent by Poseidon. The Minotaur had terrorized Crete, and the myth surrounding the labyrinth had become a symbol of mortal fear and helplessness. But Theseus, armed with nothing but his wit and his courage, entered the labyrinth and slew the monster, freeing the people of Crete from its terror. But in doing so, Theseus did more than just rid the world of a monster. He demonstrated the growing power of mortals to defy the gods and their will. By overcoming the Minotaur, Theseus had defeated a creature created by Poseidon himself, one of the most powerful gods of Olympus. The gods watched in disbelief as mortals, emboldened by their heroes and the legacy of Prometheus' defiance, began to challenge them in ways they had never before imagined. The balance of power was shifting once again, and Olympus could not remain indifferent. Zeus knew the gods had to adapt to this new reality. No longer could they sit idly by, watching mortals struggle against fate and divine will. The gods, like the mortals they ruled, would have to change. And though Zeus still believed in the supremacy of Olympus, he could not deny that the times were shifting. His reign, like that of his father Cronus, could not last forever. But the question remained: how would the gods maintain their dominance in a world where mortals were rising, where their power and will were no longer absolute? The gods would soon learn that even their immortality was not invincible. As the gods struggled to maintain their dominance over the mortal realm, a new and terrifying force was stirring beneath the surface of Olympus. The power of the gods, once absolute and unquestioned, was now being threatened by something far more dangerous than the rebellion of humans or even the defiance of the Titans. This force was something older, something far more primal, the chaos that had existed before the gods themselves. From the depths of the cosmos, the ancient forces of primordial darkness began to stir. The Titans, defeated but not destroyed, were not the only remnants of the old world. In the shadowy corners of the universe, where even the gods feared to tread, ancient beings were beginning to awaken. These beings were not gods, they were the children of chaos, born long before the Olympians had ascended to power. Among these forgotten entities was Nyx, the goddess of night, whose very presence could bring the world to its knees. Nyx had never been a part of the Olympian order, her power too vast and mysterious for even the gods to comprehend. Her dark influence was felt in every corner of existence, from the quietest corners of the underworld to the vast emptiness between the stars. Then there was Erebus, the primordial god of darkness, who was said to have existed before the creation of light itself. Erebus' power was immense, and he sought to plunge the world back into the eternal darkness that had existed before the first gods had been born. His vision was one of nothingness, a void that consumed everything in its path, leaving nothing but cold, empty oblivion. Nyx and Erebus were not alone in their desire to return the world to chaos. Their influence began to spread, affecting the gods themselves. Even the mighty Zeus, with all his power, could not ignore the creeping shadow that was spreading across Olympus. Whispers of darkness began to infiltrate the minds of the gods, and with it came the birth of a new threat, one that would not be defeated by mere thunderbolts or divine weapons. As the gods were forced to confront this primal force, they realized that they could no longer rely on their old methods of governance. They had to face an enemy that was not bound by mortal or divine law, an enemy that had existed before the dawn of time. The question was not whether the gods could defeat this threat, but whether they could survive it. The stakes could not have been higher. If the primordial forces of darkness succeeded, they would undo everything the gods had fought for. Olympus would crumble, and the entire world would be consumed by the void. Zeus, sensing the danger, called upon his fellow gods for counsel. They knew they had to act quickly, but what could they do against an enemy that existed beyond their understanding? For the first time in eons, the gods of Olympus felt vulnerable, unsure of their place in the cosmos. They had ruled for so long, but now the very foundations of their power were under attack. In the face of this existential threat, the gods turned to one of their most powerful and unpredictable allies, the mysterious and enigmatic god of time, Kronos' own son, Kronos, the god who embodied the flow of time itself. Kronos, a being of unimaginable power, had been in exile for eons. Cast away after his own attempt to usurp the Olympian throne, he had been imprisoned in the vast, timeless void between moments. But now, the gods had no choice but to turn to him for help. With his ability to manipulate time, Kronos could offer a solution that might save the gods, or doom them all. Kronos, however, was no ally to be trusted easily. His actions in the past had caused untold suffering, and his betrayal of the gods was legendary. But in this moment, the Olympians were desperate. They needed his help to confront the encroaching darkness, even if it meant risking their own destruction. With the fragile alliance formed between Zeus and Kronos, the gods set out to confront the darkness that threatened to undo everything they had fought for. But this was no ordinary battle. It was a battle for the very fabric of reality itself, a war not just for the world, but for the survival of the gods as they knew them. As the gods prepared to face the primordial forces of chaos, they were reminded that no matter how powerful they became, no matter how much they shaped the world to their will, there would always be forces greater than themselves, forces that existed beyond their comprehension, beyond even the stars themselves. The stage was set for a battle unlike any the gods had ever faced, a battle for the survival of everything they had built, a battle that would determine whether Olympus could stand against the darkness, or whether the primordial chaos would once again reign supreme. As the gods of Olympus struggled to contend with the primordial forces of darkness, an unexpected shift in the balance of power was quietly unfolding in the mortal realm. The very heroes who had once been mere instruments of divine will were now rising to power in their own right, no longer content to be pawns in the gods' eternal game. These mortals, born from humble origins, were about to change the course of history, and the gods would soon find themselves no longer the undisputed rulers of the cosmos. At the heart of this new world order stood two names that would forever alter the fate of the gods: Perseus and Achilles. Perseus, the son of Zeus and the mortal woman Danae, was a hero born of prophecy. His story began with a curse. An ancient oracle had foretold that Perseus would one day kill his grandfather, King Acrisius of Argos. In a desperate attempt to thwart fate, Acrisius locked Danae away in a bronze chamber, hoping to prevent the birth of the son who would be his undoing. But the gods, who could never resist intervening in human affairs, had different plans. Zeus, in his boundless lust and impulsiveness, visited Danae in the form of a golden shower, and from that union, Perseus was born. As the prophecy foretold, Perseus would one day slay his grandfather, but before that moment could come, the young hero's life would be forever altered by the quest that Zeus had set before him. The gods, intrigued by the mortal who was destined to confront such a monumental fate, guided Perseus through a series of harrowing challenges. They gave him gifts, most famously the winged sandals of Hermes, the shield of Athena, and the sword of Zeus. Armed with divine weapons, Perseus embarked on his legendary quest to slay Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze could turn any living being to stone. Perseus' journey, fraught with peril and divine intervention, was a testament to the complex relationship between gods and mortals. In his quest, Perseus was not merely a passive hero following divine commands. He was an active force, reshaping his own destiny and challenging the gods themselves. Along the way, he was aided not just by the gods but also by mortals who, like him, dared to defy the natural order. The slaying of Medusa was a turning point. Perseus' victory over the monstrous Gorgon not only marked his rise as a hero of myth but also signified the growing power of mortals to alter the course of fate itself. Perseus had not only defeated a creature of the gods, but he had also claimed control over the very forces of life and death. His victory over Medusa echoed across the mortal world, and with it, a new chapter was written, a chapter in which mortals and gods were no longer entirely separate, but rather intertwined in ways that neither could have foreseen. Meanwhile, on the far side of the ancient world, another mortal was rising to challenge the gods in a way that no one had before: Achilles, the greatest of the Greek heroes who fought in the Trojan War. Achilles, the son of the mortal king Peleus and the sea nymph Thetis, was born with the blessing and curse of the gods. His mother, Thetis, tried to make him immortal by dipping him in the river Styx, but his heel, where she held him, remained untouched by the waters, and thus, the Achilles heel was born, a symbol of his vulnerability. His fate, intertwined with the gods, would shape the future of Greece, and the gods themselves would learn that even their greatest gifts could not shield them from the power of a single, determined mortal. Achilles' story, unlike Perseus, was marked by a brutal and unrelenting rage. His rage was the spark that ignited the Greek army's fury against Troy and the Trojan War itself. But his anger was also his greatest weapon and his greatest flaw, for it set him on a collision course with the gods. When Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek forces, took Achilles' prized war prize, the concubine Briseis, Achilles withdrew from the battle in a rage that nearly cost the Greeks the war. In this moment of defiance, Achilles made a bold decision. He chose to withdraw from the gods' influence and follow his own path. Even the gods, who had always manipulated the fates of mortals, could not predict the consequences of Achilles' actions. His choice to remove himself from battle led to disastrous consequences for the Greek forces, and eventually, the gods had to intervene once more to restore balance to the war. However, despite the gods' intervention, Achilles' story would ultimately end in tragedy. His fated death at the hands of Paris, guided by the god Apollo, was an inevitable consequence of the curse placed on him by the gods themselves. Yet even in his death, Achilles proved something vital, that mortals, for all their flaws and limitations, could still command the attention of the gods. His legend would live on, outlasting even the gods themselves. Perseus and Achilles were not isolated examples. Across the mortal world, heroes rose who not only defied fate, but who altered the very structure of the cosmos. The gods were now faced with an undeniable truth: the mortals they once ruled were now their equals, their challengers, and in some cases, their destroyers. But this new world order was not without its cost. For every hero who challenged the gods, there were others who were broken by the weight of their own ambition. Orpheus, the musician whose song could charm even the stones, ventured into the underworld to bring back his wife, Eurydice. But in the end, his inability to resist looking back at her, a moment of doubt, sealed his fate, and he lost her forever. Orpheus' tragic end became a cautionary tale for mortals who dared to challenge the will of the gods. And then there was Jason, the leader of the Argonauts, who sought the Golden Fleece to reclaim his rightful throne. His journey, filled with trials and challenges, was as much a quest for power as it was for redemption. Yet, despite all his efforts, Jason's ultimate betrayal and failure to honor his vows led to his downfall. Jason's story was a harsh reminder that even the most heroic mortals could fall victim to the fickle nature of fate and the whims of the gods. Thus, the world began to change. The gods, once rulers of all that was, were now confronted by a new generation of mortals who would no longer bow to their will. The power of the gods was not being dismantled entirely, but their grip on the mortal realm was loosening. It was a world where gods and mortals were no longer two distinct categories, but two forces constantly shifting in a delicate and volatile dance. Yet, as mortals rose to power, the gods were forced to consider something they had long ignored, the possibility that their reign would not last forever. Olympus, once a symbol of divine, unchallenged rule, was beginning to show cracks. The gods had created heroes, but in doing so, they had set into motion a chain of events that they could not control. As the gods of Olympus struggled to maintain their dominance, the very fabric of their divine rule began to unravel. Mortals were no longer passive pawns in the gods' eternal chess game. They were rising, challenging the heavens, and, in some cases, bringing about the fall of gods who had once been untouchable. And the consequences of this cosmic shift would soon become apparent in a series of tragic and cataclysmic events that no one could have predicted. The first of these events began with a quarrel that had been brewing in the shadows of Olympus for centuries. The gods, despite their great power, were not immune to jealousy, envy, and spite. Even amongst immortals, relationships could fracture, alliances could dissolve, and rivalries could turn deadly. At the heart of this discord was the goddess Hera, queen of the gods and wife of Zeus. Hera's beauty and authority were unrivaled, but her marriage to Zeus was anything but peaceful. Zeus' infidelities were notorious, and his many affairs with mortal women had long been a source of bitter conflict between the two gods. Hera, in her bitterness, sought revenge against those whom Zeus loved, often with cruel and vengeful acts. But it was not just her husband's betrayals that drove Hera to her breaking point. It was the challenge to her divine authority, her pride, that pushed her to the brink. Hera had always been the protector of marriage and family, but her power was being undermined, not just by Zeus' infidelities, but by the increasing rise of heroes who embodied the mortal struggle for independence, free will, and defiance. Hera's rage reached its peak with her anger toward Heracles, the son of Zeus and a mortal woman, Alcmene. Heracles' very existence was a reminder of Zeus' betrayal of their sacred bond. But it was not just Heracles' birth that enraged Hera. It was his heroic journey. The 12 labors, which he was forced to undertake as a punishment for Hera's wrath, were designed to break him. Hera wanted to prove to Zeus and to the world that no mortal, no matter how strong, could ever stand above the gods. Heracles, however, proved her wrong. The labors, though seemingly impossible, were not his downfall. Instead, each task, each trial, only increased his legendary strength and further solidified his status as one of the greatest heroes the world had ever known. But the more Hera sought to destroy him, the stronger he became, until his defiance of the gods was undeniable. Heracles' perseverance became the stuff of legend, a symbol of the mortal determination to overcome divine wrath. But the rage of Hera did not end with Heracles. A new tragedy was about to unfold in the halls of Olympus, one that would shake the very foundations of the gods' power and mark the beginning of the end for the reign of the Olympians. At the heart of this looming disaster was the tragic tale of Paris, the mortal prince of Troy, and the events that would lead to the Trojan War. Paris' actions, spurred on by the gods themselves, set in motion a series of events that would bring about the greatest war the world had ever seen. The myth of the Trojan War is born from a seemingly innocent event, the judgment of Paris. During a divine banquet, 3 goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, vied for the title of the fairest. Paris, chosen as the judge, was tasked with deciding which goddess deserved the golden apple. Each goddess offered Paris a tempting bribe. Hera promised him power, Athena promised wisdom, and Aphrodite promised him the love of the most beautiful mortal woman, Helen. Paris, swayed by Aphrodite's promise, awarded her the golden apple. But in doing so, he unknowingly sealed the fate of Troy. For Helen was already married to the king of Sparta, Menelaus, and her abduction by Paris sparked a war that would devastate the ancient world. The gods, who had once ruled over the fates of mortals with calm detachment, were now directly involved in mortal conflicts, their influence spreading chaos and destruction across the world. What followed was nothing short of apocalyptic. The gods were forced to take sides in the war. Zeus tried to remain neutral, but his support of the Trojans was clear. Hera and Athena, furious with Paris, sided with the Greeks, while the vengeful Aphrodite fought to protect her favored son. The gods' personal vendettas, jealousies, and manipulations turned the Trojan War into a divine battlefield, with each god pulling the strings of mortal men, pushing them to sacrifice their lives for the gods' petty grudges. The Trojan War, spanning over a decade, would leave both sides broken and battered. Countless heroes would die, many of them fated to meet tragic ends, while the gods watched, either powerless to stop the carnage or actively causing it. The might of the gods was now on full display, and it became clear that even in the midst of such power, the gods were not immune to the destructive forces they had unleashed. Among the greatest casualties of this divine intervention was Achilles, whose wrath and ultimate death at the hands of Paris would echo through history. His fall from grace marked the tragic end of a hero who had once embodied the might of the gods. But Achilles' death, though foretold by prophecy, was not the final act of the gods' meddling. In the aftermath of the war, the gods would realize that their manipulation of mortal affairs had come at a great cost. The Trojan War had exposed their vulnerabilities, their inability to control the very events they had set in motion. The destruction of Troy, the deaths of countless heroes, and the loss of divine prestige left the gods weakened. Even the gods of Olympus, so sure of their immortality, were now beginning to feel the weight of their actions, and their reign was on the verge of collapse. As the gods returned to Olympus, bruised by their failures and the consequences of their involvement in the mortal world, it became clear that the age of gods was coming to an end. The mortals had demonstrated their strength, their resolve, and their power to defy even the most powerful of deities. The gods, once unchallenged in their rule, now faced a world where they were no longer the unquestioned masters of fate. Now, a new chapter was about to unfold, a chapter where the gods would not simply watch from Olympus, but would be forced to reckon with the growing power of the mortals they had long controlled. A chapter where the very existence of the gods was now under threat from the mortals they had once deemed inferior. As the gods reeled from the aftermath of the Trojan War, a new and darker force began to emerge from the depths of the cosmos, an ancient primordial entity, older than even the gods of Olympus themselves. This force had remained hidden in the shadows, biding its time, while the gods of Mount Olympus squabbled amongst themselves and meddled in the affairs of mortals. But now, the time had come for it to rise. This force was Chaos, the first of the primordial beings that had existed before even the gods. In the beginning, when the world was nothing but a swirling mass of disorder, Chaos had reigned supreme. But the gods, led by Uranus and later Cronus, had supplanted Chaos, bringing order to the universe. Yet Chaos, unlike the gods who were confined to their roles and domains, was an ever-present, all-consuming void, a force that could not be contained or fully understood. As the gods of Olympus, with their petty feuds and human-like emotions, continued to lose their grip on power, Chaos began to stir once more, its influence creeping into the very fabric of existence. The more the gods ignored the true balance of the universe in their arrogance and ambition, the more they unwittingly awakened the primal force they had once subdued. The gods, consumed by their own arrogance, failed to notice that they were being pushed to the brink by something far more powerful and ancient than themselves. As the once unified divine order fractured, the gods' immortal hubris led to their very undoing, and with each action they took, the primordial power of Chaos grew stronger. But Chaos was not the only primordial force that had begun to reawaken. Erebus, the god of darkness, and Nyx, the goddess of night, had also long remained dormant, overshadowed by the more powerful Olympians. Yet, as the gods faltered and their power waned, Erebus and Nyx, the primordial rulers of the dark and mysterious forces of the universe, began to assert their dominance. Together, Chaos, Erebus, and Nyx brought with them an era of darkness, a time when the gods would be forced to confront not just their fading power, but the very forces of entropy that had once existed before them. At the center of this new, chaotic world stood one of the greatest threats to the gods, the dark titan Cronus, the father of Zeus, who had once ruled over the world with an iron fist. Cronus had been overthrown by his own son, Zeus, but now, from his prison in the depths of Tartarus, he began to stir once again. The chains that had bound him seemed to lose their strength as the primordial forces began to rise, and Cronus, seeking vengeance for his fall, once again plotted against his children. The gods, who had long considered themselves immortal and invincible, now faced a rising tide of darkness and destruction. They had defeated the Titans in the past, but could they overcome the combined forces of Chaos, Erebus, Nyx, and the vengeful Cronus? Even their greatest warriors, like Heracles and Perseus, could not prepare them for the true battle that was coming. But the gods were not completely helpless. As their divine reign began to crumble, the might of their greatest hero, Zeus, the king of the gods, began to shine through. With the power of the sky and the thunderbolt, Zeus sought to unite the gods once more, calling upon the strength of those heroes and mortals who had once served the Olympians in battle. Together, they would face the growing darkness and the threat of the primordial forces rising against them. Zeus, who had once taken the throne by overthrowing Cronus, now had to face the consequences of his own actions. The gods had long overlooked the existence of these primordial beings, but now their neglect had awakened an ancient vengeance. The clash between the old powers and the new would determine the fate of the gods, and the entire world. The gods gathered their forces, preparing for what would be the final battle to preserve their reign. But in the dark corners of the world, whispers of betrayal and ruin spread. Could Zeus rally the gods in time to prevent the destruction of Olympus? Would mortals, who had already proven themselves so powerful, rise up to aid or oppose the gods in their final conflict? The time had come for the gods of Olympus to face their greatest challenge, not just from the primordial beings they had long forgotten, but from themselves. It was a battle of destiny, one that would test the very limits of the gods' power. The fate of the universe, the gods, and mortals alike rested on the outcome of this final reckoning. As the primordial forces of Chaos, Erebus, and Nyx surged forward, the gods of Olympus were no longer the undisputed rulers of the cosmos. What had once been a glorious kingdom of light and power was now on the verge of collapse, shattered by divine conflict and the awakening of ancient forces that could not be controlled. The gods were forced into a corner, where even their immortality could not save them from the ever-encroaching darkness. Zeus, once the mighty king of the gods, stood at the head of a weakened council, struggling to maintain control over Olympus. His lightning bolt, once a symbol of invincible power, now felt like a mere flicker in the overwhelming night. His mind raced as he considered their options. Would the gods unite, or would they be torn apart by their own egos and hatred? But Zeus wasn't alone in his determination. His brother Poseidon, the god of the sea, and his other sibling Hades, ruler of the underworld, were still loyal, but even their immense powers seemed small in the face of the rising storm. For the first time, the gods saw a terrifying possibility. Their dominance over the world was no longer guaranteed. The gods had pushed the balance of the universe too far, and now they were reaping the consequences. Meanwhile, in the mortal realm, heroes who had once fought for the gods, like Perseus and Theseus, began to question their allegiance. The mortals had seen too much. The gods were not the flawless beings they had once believed them to be. The Trojan War had shown them the gods' cruelty and capriciousness, and now, the rise of the primordial powers cast a long shadow over their faith. Would the mortals stand by the gods in this final moment of need, or would they rise against them? As the gods met in a darkened hall of Olympus, the air heavy with tension, a silence fell over the assembly. It was time to make a choice that would shape the future of both the divine and mortal worlds. And from this council, one voice would rise to call for a final, desperate gamble. The binding of the primordials. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, knowing the destruction that would unfold if they allowed the primordial forces to spread unchecked, made a fateful decision. They would seek to bind the ancient entities of Chaos, Erebus, and Nyx, not through force, but through a risky and dangerous ritual, a binding that would require the sacrifice of a god's life force. It was a decision that would change everything. The ritual was dangerous. The very forces they sought to contain were ancient and unknowable. The gods had no real understanding of how to control them, and their plan to imprison the primordial forces was fraught with peril. But if they failed, the entire world, mortal and divine alike, would fall into an eternal void, swallowed by the primordial chaos that had once ruled all. The first to volunteer for the ritual was Zeus, the very heart of Olympus. His power over the sky was unmatched, but even he knew that facing the primordial forces required something beyond his divine strength. In an act of ultimate selflessness, Zeus agreed to offer a part of his immortal essence in exchange for the power to bind chaos itself. Poseidon and Hades, reluctant to lose their brother, knew that they too had to contribute. Poseidon would sacrifice his connection to the seas, and Hades would give up his dominion over the underworld. Together, they would channel their combined power into a single, unbreakable spell, the binding of the primordials. As the gods prepared for the ritual, word spread among the mortals. Legends began to surface of the gods' final struggle against the very forces they had once controlled. Heroes and warriors who had once fought alongside the gods now turned their eyes toward Olympus, wondering if this would be their chance to defy the gods forever. But even as the gods gathered their power, an ominous presence began to stir in the depths of Tartarus. Cronus, freed from his chains, saw an opportunity. The gods were distracted by their own self-preservation, their eyes fixed on the ritual. But Cronus, still embittered by his fall, had no intention of allowing them to succeed. His thirst for vengeance had only grown, and now he sought not only to destroy Olympus but to take the throne for himself. In a single moment of betrayal, Cronus launched his attack. The earth trembled as his enormous figure, clad in dark armor, emerged from the abyss of Tartarus. With him, he brought forth a new army, an army of titans and forgotten creatures from the deepest parts of the underworld. His attack came without warning, a cataclysmic surge of destruction that would shake the very foundations of the gods' world. The gods, already weakened by their battle with the primordial forces, found themselves caught between two unstoppable forces, the rising darkness of the primordial entities and the vengeful wrath of Cronus. They were torn between survival and vengeance, between saving their realm and the realms of mortals or securing their own legacy at any cost. And so, the final battle for Olympus began. As the ritual to bind the primordial forces was about to begin, the gods of Olympus stood at the precipice of a world-shattering conflict. Their fate and the fate of all existence now rested on a knife's edge. The binding of the primordials could either restore order or plunge the cosmos into an irreversible spiral of chaos and destruction. But in their moment of peril, a new and unforeseen danger loomed, one that would change the course of the gods' final battle forever. Before the ritual could begin, Cronus, mighty and vengeful, made his move. With a roar that shook the very foundations of Olympus, the Titan King unleashed his fury. His army, a vast legion of titans and horrors from the deepest reaches of Tartarus, descended upon the gods like a storm of devastation. The heavens trembled as the gods scrambled to mount a defense against the oncoming assault. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, their powers already strained from the earlier conflict with the primordial forces, now faced an even more immediate threat, the wrath of their own father, the very Titan who had once ruled the heavens and sought to devour his own children. Cronus, though bound in the past, had returned with newfound strength and rage, and he was determined to bring down Olympus once and for all. Zeus, wielding his thunderbolt with deadly precision, confronted his father on the battlefield. Lightning crackled in the sky, illuminating the blood-stained ground beneath them. Every strike of Zeus' thunderbolt rang out like a bell of war, but Cronus, fueled by his centuries of hatred and thirst for power, retaliated with the full might of his titanic form. "Father," Zeus shouted, his voice thundering across the battlefield, "you will not destroy what I have built." "What you have built?" Cronus sneered, his voice like the roar of a storm. "You have stolen what was mine, Zeus. I will reclaim the throne, and I will show you the true power of the Titans." But Cronus was not alone. His army, a terrifying array of titans, giants, and twisted creatures, surged forward, attacking from all sides. The gods of Olympus were forced to divide their attention, fighting back against this onslaught while trying to maintain the fragile hope of completing the binding of the primordials. Poseidon, god of the seas, summoned tidal waves that crashed against the Titan horde, but the Titans were vast and relentless. Hades, lord of the underworld, summoned the dead to rise from the very earth, sending waves of spirits to swarm the enemies. Yet still, the Titans pressed forward, their raw power overwhelming the gods' defenses. On the other side of the battlefield, mortal heroes, some of the greatest to ever walk the earth, joined the fray. Heracles, who had long fought against the gods' will, now stood side by side with them. His strength, once used as a tool for the gods, was now turned against the very forces of darkness that sought to destroy them. With sword in hand and courage unmatched, he carved through the Titans, rallying the gods with every blow. Yet, despite the gods' combined might and the strength of mortal heroes, they were still no match for the overwhelming force of Cronus and his army. The very ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble with the weight of his fury. But just when all seemed lost, an unexpected shift began to stir in the depths of the cosmos. The primordial forces, which had been bound by the gods' actions, now began to react to the chaos unfolding in Olympus. The clash between Cronus and the gods had, in essence, opened a gateway that threatened to unleash all the primordial forces that had long been dormant. And in the midst of this cosmic storm, one final, earth-shattering truth was revealed. The binding ritual had awakened a power even older and more dangerous than Cronus or the primordial gods themselves. Out of the swirling chaos and darkness, the primordial force known as Eros, the god of love and desire, emerged, a force that, though often ignored by the gods, had been the true origin of everything. Eros was the force that had created the universe, that had given birth to both gods and mortals, and it was now emerging to reclaim its rightful place. Eros was not like the other gods. It was a primal force of creation, the driving power behind all life and all destruction. It was the force that had made the gods possible, but it was also the force that could unmake them. As Eros emerged, the gods were struck with a realization. If they continued to fight among themselves, if they continued to allow their pride and selfishness to rule their decisions, then it would not be Cronus, nor Chaos, nor Erebus, who would destroy them. It would be themselves. As Eros swept across the battlefield, the gods felt their power begin to wane, their wills buckling under its influence. The clash between love and destruction, the force of creation versus the force of wrath, was being waged not just in the heavens, but in the hearts of every god. They had been given a choice, to embrace unity or to be torn apart by their own internal divisions. Zeus, standing tall among the ruins of battle, looked to his fellow gods. He saw the fear in their eyes, the recognition that their own arrogance had brought them to this moment. He knew that only together, only in harmony with their most primal origins, could they hope to overcome the rising tide of chaos and reclaim control of their world. But the path to redemption was not clear. Eros' presence was overwhelming, and the gods' unity was fragile. Even in the face of such cosmic forces, would the gods be able to overcome their own flaws in time to save Olympus and the mortal world? Just as the gods' resolve was being tested, a final twist of fate took shape. A mortal hero, who had long been part of the gods' world but was never fully one of them, stood poised to challenge everything. Perseus, the great slayer of monsters, who had faced the wrath of gods and titans alike, now stood at the center of the divine battle. Could a mortal, a being without divine power or immortal strength, turn the tide against the gods themselves? Could the one who had always fought for the gods, but never been one of them, be the key to saving the universe? As the divine forces of Olympus quaked under the weight of their own internal struggle, and the primordial powers threatened to engulf the heavens, a moment of clarity emerged in the chaos. Perseus, the mortal hero who had defied gods and titans alike, now stood at the center of the conflict, an unexpected champion in a world where gods were thought to be the ultimate authority. His heart was full of conviction, for he knew that this final battle would determine not just the fate of the gods, but of every living being, mortal or immortal. Perseus, having already defeated the greatest of monsters and conquered challenges that no mortal had ever faced, now faced the gods themselves. But unlike the gods, whose powers were bound by pride, ego, and endless conflict, Perseus carried the wisdom of mortals, humility, courage, and the belief that the world was bigger than any single being, divine or mortal. Zeus, having witnessed Perseus rise to power, turned to him in desperation. The king of the gods was no longer the indomitable figure he once was. His confidence had been shattered by the sheer scale of the destruction unfolding around him. Cronus' forces were immense, and the primordial powers were beyond their control. The gods had fought many battles, but none had been like this. And now, with the emerging force of Eros threatening to undo them all, Zeus had little choice but to seek help from the one being who had never bowed to the gods, the very mortal who had always stood against their will. Perseus, Zeus said, his voice heavy with a weight of resignation, we have reached the end of our reign. We've made mistakes, blinded by our own power. Now, only you, a mortal, can save us. You have the strength and courage that we have lost. For the first time, Perseus looked into the eyes of Zeus, not with the awe of a hero seeing his god, but with the clarity of someone who had seen the gods for what they truly were. He knew the gods were fallible, but he also knew that they had a choice, just like mortals did. He nodded not out of blind loyalty, but out of a sense of duty. I will not fight for you, Perseus said, his voice unwavering. I fight for the world, for all of us, mortals and gods alike. Only by defeating Cronus and the primordial forces, and breaking the cycle of endless destruction, can we restore balance. As Perseus prepared for the final battle, the gods stood at his side, not as their rulers, but as allies in this last, desperate attempt to save all that they had once created. But even with their combined power, defeating Cronus, the Titans, and the forces of chaos was no simple task. Perseus would need to wield more than his sword, he would need to wield the truth of the universe itself. With the might of Olympus and the heart of a mortal, Perseus set his sights on Cronus. The Titan king had grown monstrous, his form twisted with the power he had stolen over the centuries. His rage was palpable, but so was his fear. Cronus knew that his reign had come to an end, that the gods had finally risen against him. But he would not go down without a fight. His titanic strength was unmatched, and his armies were endless. But he had one fatal flaw, his ego. In the heat of battle, Perseus faced Cronus head-on, his sword gleaming with the light of the heavens. But unlike the gods who had fought with pride, Perseus fought with a quiet understanding. He was not the most powerful being in the universe, nor the most invincible. But he was the one who could see the truth that the gods had long ignored, that power alone could not sustain them. Only through unity and sacrifice could they overcome what they had created. The final confrontation between Perseus and Cronus was like no battle the gods had ever seen. The sky rained fire, and the earth trembled beneath their feet. But Perseus, using his wit and his courage, was able to outmaneuver the Titan. The gods, now unified in their purpose, channeled their strength into Perseus, lending him their power for one final strike. With one mighty blow, Perseus struck at the heart of Cronus, shattering the Titan's form and sending shockwaves across the world. But even as Cronus fell, the battle was not yet won. Eros, the primordial force of creation and destruction, had risen to its full power, and it began to undo the very fabric of reality. The universe, now caught in a delicate balance between creation and destruction, was on the verge of collapse. In that moment, Perseus did the unthinkable. He sacrificed himself, offering his mortal soul as a vessel to contain the chaotic energies of Eros. With his final act, Perseus bound the primordial force of creation, imprisoning it within himself and ensuring that the balance of the world would remain intact. As his body began to disintegrate, Perseus smiled. His sacrifice would ensure that the world and the gods would live on, not through power, but through unity. His mortal soul, now intertwined with the cosmos itself, would serve as a reminder to both gods and mortals of the price of arrogance and the power of selflessness. With the destruction of Eros, the primordial forces were contained once again, and the world was saved. The gods of Olympus, having witnessed the bravery of the mortal hero, were forever changed. They had learned the ultimate truth, that the world could not be ruled by power alone, but by understanding, sacrifice, and love. But as the gods returned to Olympus, they knew that things would never be the same. The age of the gods was over. The world had been saved, not by the might of the gods, but by the heart of a mortal,